Deadpool 2 introduces moviegoers to the cyborg butt kicker Cable, in a storyline that saw the futuristic mutant come back through time to modern day, in order to prevent the deaths of his loved ones. Played expertly by Josh Brolin, this Cable was gruff, tough, and ready to face down anything Deadpool could throw at him. But what if there was more to him than meets the cybernetic eye? What if Cable was not the version of Cable the most comic fans expected? Buckle up, movie fans, because today we're going to talk about how Cable could actually be Wolverine. Brolin had quite the year in 2018. Not only did he play the purple-chinned monstrosity Thanos in Infinity War, but he also played another Marvel character, Cable. And honestly, his tough appearance perfectly fit the character. In fact, his grizzled performance in the film is enough to convince people that he could have made a great Batman or even Wolverine. What if I was to tell you that he could still be one of those characters? I wish I was talking about Batman, because he would be amazing in the role of an older version of the Dark Knight, but no, I'm talking about the adamantium skeleton having, fast healing Canadian ball of fury, Wolverine. Wait a minute, you're probably all saying right now, how could he play Cable and Wolverine? That's just not gonna fly. Well, what if I told you that Fox may have figured out a way to make this dream casting a reality while still keeping Brolin in the role of Cable? You'd think I was mad, right? Well, I mean, I kinda am, but for completely different reasons. What if Cable was actually a future version of Wolverine? Sure, he may be called Cable, but there is some pretty solid evidence that he might not be the character that we all think he is. See, in the comics, this seemingly crazy situation has been the case before. In the Ultimate Universe, one of the many parallel universes to the mainline Marvel 616 universe, there was a version of Cable that was in fact an older Logan. Yeah, but that's the Ultimate Universe, not the official main canon. Well, it should be noted that the Ultimate Universe has had a major impact stylistically on both the X-Men films and the MCU. Not to mention the fact that the characterization of Cable in Deadpool 2 fits a lot closer to the Ultimate Universe version than the son of Scott Summers and Jean Grey that we see in the main 616 universe. And I don't really mean physically, though that also applies as well, I suppose. Both characters have had storylines where loved ones, specifically a wife and child, have been lost tragically. Both were relatively emotionally cut off and have quite the biting sense of humor. That's some pretty surface level stuff, but it's there. Now you're probably thinking, if Cable in Deadpool 2 was actually Wolverine, where were the claws? Well, this theory accounts for that, as in his Ultimate X-Men debut, Cable-Reen, as I'm choosing to call him from now on, explained that he rarely pops the claws anymore, instead using his knowledge of the future to fight. One more thing about Cable-Reen was the fact that he came back to modern day to try to take out a seemingly innocent mutant before he was able to destroy the future. Gee, doesn't that sound familiar? In the case of the comics, it wasn't a young kid from New Zealand, but you know, it's kind of the same idea. Now, so far we've spent a pretty good amount of time talking about how Cable was like Cable-Reen, but how about we mix things up and instead talk about how Deadpool 2's Cable is not like Cable in the comics? Because guess what? There are some pretty glaring differences between the two, like to the point that it would be sort of hard to argue that they are even supposed to be the same character. First off is the fact that this version of Cable is significantly shorter than the 7-foot-tall comic Cable, though to be honest, that's sort of to be expected.
Cable! He's very short, 5'11", not like in the comics!
At 5'11", though, Deadpool 2's Cable is a bit closer in height to Wolverine's canon 5'3". The height thing is admittedly a bit nitpicky, however, there is one little detail that isn't so little. The fact that Deadpool 2's Cable doesn't really seem to have Cable's powers, like any of them, at all. That does seem to be a bit of a glaring oversight if it wasn't on purpose. Comic Cable has two distinct sources of superpowers: his parents, Cyclops and Jean Grey, and the techno-organic virus that transformed half of his body into metal. Now, the techno-organic virus granted him super strength and speed in the comics, so seeing him meet his match in the form of Wade Wilson, a dude who has otherwise normal human levels of strength, kind of doesn't really sit well. As for what his mama gave him, in the comics, Cable is an Omega-level mutant, one of the most powerful ever in fact. He's telekinetic, can glimpse the future, and even psychically sense mutants and their powers. He is a bit overpowered to be sure, and the film version of Cable is nowhere near his power level. He doesn't show any signs of possessing any sort of psychic abilities, and while he does have cybernetic parts, they kind of look a little bit more like they were purposefully placed in order to replace lost body parts or enhance existing ones. He uses these cybernetic upgrades to launch gizmos at enemies, project shields, and survive impacts that would shatter the bones of lesser men. Basically, he functions more as a version of Wolverine that's lost his healing factor, relying on weaponry, his durability, and gadgetry in order to accomplish his goals. And it's these goals that springboard this idea from a simple fan theory to full-on nerd overload status, because it could all lead to an epic X-Men crossover event. In the Ultimate Universe comics, the arrival of Cable brought with it a massive plot arc that saw the future version of Wolverine coming back in time to take out Charles Xavier in order to save a future that Xavier helped to destroy. Obviously, the X-Men weren't down with his idea and instead fought him in an attempt to save their leader. However, Cable was far too advanced and powerful to be taken down, and he seemingly succeeded in his mission. However, what actually transpired was that Cable took Xavier forward into his future to prove to him how bad things would get, and that he must do what he can to prevent this future from coming to pass. Meanwhile, Bishop, another mutant from the future, was stranded in the past. He worked with the X-Men to unite the team against the true threat, the return of Apocalypse. Up to this point, the X-Men believed that they had vanquished the godlike mutant for good. While they had defeated Apocalypse, the being soon found himself a new vessel, that being a souped-up Nathaniel Essex, aka Mr. Sinister. This version of Apocalypse was nasty, and in Cable's timeline had even managed to stop Wolverine's healing ability and tear off his arm, completing the character's transformation from Wolverine to this universe's Cable, or as I like to call him, Cable-rine. This time, however, Cable and Xavier arrived just in the nick of time, right as the X-Men were confronting Apocalypse. It was actually Jean Grey who dealt the final blow in this encounter, fully embracing the Phoenix Force in order to defeat Apocalypse. With the world saved and Apocalypse beaten back, the future was changed, and Cable and Bishop faded from existence, all Back to the Future style. Now, assuming that the Disney and Fox merger doesn't completely decimate any plans that Fox may have had for the franchise post-Dark Phoenix, the idea that Cable is future Wolvie sets us up for a very exciting series of events. Let's take a look at how things are set up as of now. X-Men Apocalypse obviously established the titular villain as a massive threat, and while he seemed fully defeated at the end of that film, he could still be out there, due in part to the fact that we weren't left with a body. Sure, he was vaporized by the Phoenix Force powered Jean Grey, which was also successfully set up by this film, I might add, but his consciousness could still be around. It's also worth mentioning that X-Men Apocalypse had a noticeable reference to Mr. Sinister in the form of a nod towards the Essex name, which was also referenced in Deadpool 2 in the form of the Essex House for Mutant Rehabilitation. So Mr. Sinister definitely exists in this universe, at least in some form. And now we have a time traveler named Cable who said that he came back in time to try to save his family, which he apparently did by the end of Deadpool 2. But you know what else happened at the end of Deadpool 2? He stuck around and specifically mentioned that he would see if he could stop the modern mutants from screwing up the future. Now where have we heard that sort of talk before? Now think about this for a second. What if the entire "I gotta save my family" thing was all just a ploy? In the comics, Cable-rine tends to lie through his teeth to get what he wants and set things going down the path that he thinks will help avoid the rise of Apocalypse. What if the end of Deadpool 2 happened exactly the way that Cable intended all along? Honestly, if this theory turns out to be true, we could theoretically be seeing a fairly epic future for the X-Men franchise.
Will be known as X-Force.
Deadpool 2 sets up a potential X-Force film, with Cable at the lead, which could see him further setting events in motion and possibly formally introducing Mr. Sinister in all of his evil glory. Of course, this all assumes that Disney and Marvel don't just end the franchise once the deal between Disney and Fox goes through, which is admittedly likely what will happen. Just imagine though how amazing of a story this could all build up to, and how awesome it would be to see Brolin pop the claws. arms. Only 3 of them though, cause you know, he only has 1 natural arm left. Either way, odds are we will probably never see this theoretical storyline come to pass. And if this theory is indeed accurate, we could be left with one of the most disappointing what ifs in cinema history. What do you think about this theory? Could Deadpool 2's Cable actually be the ultimate universe version of Wolverine? Let us know your thoughts in the comments down below, and while you're down there, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to ScreenRant for more awesome videos just like this one. Thanks for watching, and I hope to see you at the movies.